afternoon session. We're going to have a great discussion right now. I'd like to introduce the founder and CEO of Good African Coffee, a Uganda-based social enterprise. Good African works with a supply network of 14,000 coffee farmers in western Uganda, where the company has developed 17 savings and credit co-ops for those farming communities. It was the first African-owned coffee brand to be stocked in UK supermarkets, and since the end of 2011, it's also sold in US supermarkets. I encourage you to go out, as Bill showed us, go get your coffee. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts London and a member of Uganda's Presidential Investor Roundtable, and sits on the board of the Maisha Film Lab. He's won several awards, including the Legatum Pioneers for Prosperity Award, the Uganda Coffee Development Authority's Ugandan Entrepreneur of the Year Award. He was nominated by the World Economic Forum as Young Global Leader, all of this taking place in 2007, and as a Financial Times ArcelorMittal Boldness in Business Award 2010. He's been published in The Guardian, The Financial Times, The Telegraph, The New Vision, Uganda, among other publications, and he's currently completing his first book to be published by Random House in 2012. So I know we're going to have a great conversation, and Bill has told me wonderful things about the great coffee. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Andrew Rugasira up to the podium to talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Yo. If my wife was here, she would say, "Who's that guy?" It's true. I just want to clarify, my company is not a Millennium Village. Huh? I just wanted you guys to. And secondly, I've got real issues with the organizers for this conference, because why isn't Stuart Pepper in here? I mean, when the guy said he has $280 million to spend, I had a warm liquid going down my leg. You know, I was like, and I'm here about to explain my model, and he's nowhere to be seen. I should have done the morning session, Bill. It's a great honor for me to be here from Uganda. I came in on Sunday, and I brought you some nice African sun, right? That's why you've had a great week. Bill, thank you for giving this platform to an African entrepreneur. You know, these meetings are seldom addressed by people in business, key actors in the marketplace. I think it's very important when, you know, people say that the private sector is the engine for growth, and we rarely hear from the private sector. So it's a real honor and privilege to be here. Today I'm going to share with you a little bit about my company. I'm going to share with you a little bit about our vision to bring coffees to the global market and to use trade as opposed to handouts to transform our farmers and their communities. I will expound on our entrepreneurial model that we created in 2004, the journey that we've walked along in trying to achieve our vision, and some of the lessons and challenges that we've faced along the way. And I'm hoping that by the time I'm done, you'll appreciate, like I do, that the only way you can bring about sustainable economic growth and development is not through handouts and charity and sympathy. It's through hard work, it's through creativity, it's through innovation, and it's by creating that environment where entrepreneurship flourishes. The same thing that happened in this country. So I always wonder why, when it comes to Africa, do we have a whole different set of solutions? Why is it dependent on people's sympathy, on charity, on philanthropy? You don't really hear people talking about models for entrepreneurship and models that will bring about business solutions to these big problems. So, in the beginning, I would just like to say as a background that we operate in the agriculture sector in Uganda, where over 70% of the population earn a living. The agriculture sector has been shown to be the most significant sector to bring about real sustainable transformation. But it's also the most neglected. It's neglected by governments, it's neglected by capital. In Uganda, for example, only 4% of the national budget goes towards the agriculture sector, 4%. And out of the total loans that are available in the country, only 3.8% goes into the agriculture sector. And as a recent study showed by Calestis Juma, the number of people who've gone hungry in the agriculture sector has grown from 150 million in 1990 to 239 million in 2010. This is a sector that's teeming with entrepreneurs, it's teeming with people with creative ideas, but they don't have access to markets for their products, they don't have capital to become the engine of their growth. And yet agriculture has been proven to be 2 to 4 times more effective in reducing poverty than other sectors. The Malawian example, where in 2005, they had a national food deficit of 43%. In 2007, they had a surplus of 53%. I just want to put up a model at the back there, just to show you the kind of social entrepreneurial model that we began with in 2004. As you can see, I'll just use the microphone. Is there a microphone here so that I can turn around? If I could just have a microphone so I could speak to... In 2004, we went to Western Uganda. Thank you. In 2004, we went to Western Uganda. In 2004, that's how I speak when I'm meeting the British supermarkets. My name is Andrew Rugasira. 2004, went to Western Uganda. And we began to build the foundation for this. Now, the first thing we identified was a rural community. And there's a slight difference with how we look at the rural community to how maybe the Millennium Village people look at the rural community. We don't look at them as a bunch of guys who have a need, okay? And we come in and we have a solution to that need. So we don't use words like need assessment. We don't use words like establishing what inputs they might need in their situation. We look at them as people who have significant social capital. They have land, they have labor, and they have knowledge. They've been growing these crops, they've been producing them, so they have basic knowledge. So what we decided to do in terms of interventions was what could enhance the capital that's already existent there. And one of the things we thought we needed to do was knowledge transfer. So yes, they were growing coffee, but how could they up their yields? How could they up their yields and how could they up their quality that the price they would receive in the end would be better than the price they were receiving now? So we trained trainers. We put farmers into groups. We created demonstration gardens, and we trained trainers. And the trainers would then go back and train the rest of the farmers. We also established that technology would also help not just their yields, but the quality of their outputs. So we not only advised them, but we gave them some pilot technologies, hand palpers for their coffee. We realized that one of the biggest issues was, as entrepreneurial as they were, and as productive as they could be, they didn't have the institutional frameworks to kind of pull their resources together and capabilities together to bring about greater production and take advantage of bigger markets. So what we did was we created these producer groups, and each producer group had 50 farmers. In that producer group, they elected their leadership. They had a male and female trainer who would train the rest of the group. Then we also created savings and credit co-ops, and this would allow the farmers to pull their resources together and lend each other. Because one of the biggest problems we established was a lot of these farmers were being held hostage by loan sharks. And you think urban loan sharks are bad, you should see how the rural loan sharks work. They would come to the farm, they would estimate the crop value that the farmer has. So if there's $1,000 or let's say $500 worth of coffee, they say this coffee is worth $50 or $100. The farmer has no information or knowledge to estimate that correctly, and he mortgages his shamba for consumption money. So one of the things we advised them to do was, if they pulled their resources together, we never gave them a cent. We didn't put any single shilling or dollar into those savings and credit corps. We said that they were the solution to their problem. And what we encourage them to believe is that they're not only the solution to their problem, but if they pull their resources together, then as small and seemingly poor farmers, as a group, they would have serious potential. They would have capital, and they would have opportunities to create transformation in their communities. Now, when we did all this, we immediately began to see some quick and straightforward transformations. You know, one, the quality of coffee improved, the yield increased, they were interested in conservation and environmental standards, and we helped them get certification. But they did all the knowledge transfer within their own communities. They took up the training themselves with enthusiasm and passed it on to other farmers across the Rwenzori Mountains, which is where we operate. They managed the producer groups themselves, and something really extraordinary began to happen. You know, the values that we don't really hear in a lot of these development reports began to manifest. You know, entrepreneurship, business exposure, the whole issue of dignity and esteem, the pride in producing a product that they knew was going into a market and they were receiving a good price and they could put their children in school, good schools, and get good health care. That became such an important catalyst. And this is an underrated and, I think, under-debated issue, because the thing that stimulates what we found in our experience, these producer communities, is not just capital, but actually the capacity and the feeling that they can actually do something for themselves. And this is what really we found was very motivational. We got better quality, we got better prices, we got financial literacy growth in the area, and also we just found improvements in the social economic situation. Now, there are several models that have been developed. A lot of you buy ethical coffees, you buy fair trade coffees, and there are several models out there that purport to bring about transformation in the communities. The one thing that America has taught many of us, the Western industrialized countries, the Southeast Asian tigers and economies, and really the North Atlantic countries that have developed, is no one is going to come and define how you should develop. Yeah. No one is going to come and offer you the models or the solutions to your problems. No one did it for you in America. No one did it for the Japanese. No one is doing it for the Chinese. And no one is going to do it for the Africans. It's a fallacy that someone can come from outside and offer a package. That's why we spend so much meetings and conferences and papers and position papers of what is working or what's not working, because these interventions are from without. What needs to happen is partnerships built on respect and dignity. Africa working with multinational partnerships, bringing about solutions to some of these intractable problems. Now, we found that the approach to the rural economy is as important as the capital that's invested. Stuart said something which really bothered me. He said, the problem we have is we don't have that many entrepreneurs. That's absolute nonsense. Because on the other hand, we say, oh, these are farmers that live on $1 a day. I mean, how many of you guys could live on $1 a day? I mean, can you imagine the entrepreneurship and the kind of innovation and creativity it takes to live on such minimal income? It takes much more creativity than living in New York City on $1 million a year. I'm sure it does. Because, I mean, people still have needs, they still have aspirations, they have families, they have children, they have dreams. People think that the rural economy doesn't have people who dream. When we ask them, what are the things that you wish for in their focus group discussion, they say, better education for our children. They don't need schools just for the sake of schools. They need good quality schools. That's why sometimes we have challenges with free primary education in the rural areas, because people know those schools are not the best schools. They aspire for schools where they can pay school fees
and get better quality education. So they shun those free schools. When you give them free health care, they say, well, that free health care doesn't work for us because sometimes the drugs are not there, sometimes the quality is expired, etc., etc. They have aspirations. And if we treat them like entrepreneurs, people with dignity, self-respect, and aspiring for the same things that in our own different cultures we would aspire to, then I think the relationship would be built on a different foundation. And we might find that we might have a different set of results. Now, look, we're a small company. The CV sounds really exaggerated because we're really a small company that just tried to embark on a pilot and a test to see whether Africans working together could bring quality coffee to the global market. And if people buy that coffee, the farmer's livelihood would improve and we could make a profit. And what we found when we started in 2004 to 2012, and I'm sorry, this is not a randomized, what do you guys call it? Randomized controlled trial. I apologize. It's not as complex or detailed as that. And I've already offered a colleague an opportunity to come and test some of these clusters in Uganda. The purchases of coffee when we went in 2004 were 7,000 kilos. You know, the price in the market was about 43 cents per kilo. You know, the prices that we paid were $1.25. Why did we pay a higher price than in the market? We wanted to motivate quality. So we said, if you bring quality coffee, we buy it at a higher price. The farmers receiving agronomy training and in producer groups were about 2,000. Those who were certified, 0. The savings and credit cooperatives at the time, 0. The export markets we had at that time were just South Africa. We had one coffee shop, our sales revenue was $82,000, and we were roasting and packing our coffee in South Africa. And my wife kept saying, what the hell have you got us into, Andrew? In 2011, over the last 7 years, we've built the productive capacity of the farmers, and in 2011, they supplied a total of 430,000 kilos, which is about 430 tons. Now, the local prices have gone up. That's a global issue. And we paid $4.25. Sorry, I'm getting granular on this because I think seldom do we have an opportunity to actually, get to the ground level of some of these entrepreneurial initiatives. So I think it's just important for us to appreciate that. Today, we have 14,000 households. 14,000 households, a turnover of $1.1 million. I once wrote to an NGO here in the US and said, if you just give me $2 million, I could get you 150,000 farmers. Because it's not actually about the capital, because a lot of that stuff goes in air tickets and reports and big cars and stuff like that. But actually, it's just a few things that you need to catalyze that will motivate communities to partner with one another and to get together with one another and to see through some of these initiatives. It's not us. We can catalyze. It's not Good African that has gone and created 14,000 farmers. All Good African did was share the opportunity and say, you can do this. I shared my own journey as a student in England. I shared my own journey as studying economics. I shared my own journey as never seeing African products on the shelf. I shared my own journey about the difficulty of breaking into those supermarkets. But I said we could do this. And some of those things are difficult to quantify for development economists, difficult to quantify for policy people, difficult to quantify for people with charity. There's something about huge amounts of capital blinding you and making you less humble to actually listen and see what actually works on the ground. So today we roast this coffee in Uganda, and we're exporting a finished product from Uganda to the United Kingdom and to the US. Now, what are the lessons? What have we learned along the way? The one thing I learned is never to believe when the World Bank says export-led growth is a solution to African development. Bill, that is, I think, the biggest conceptual fallacy that's not built on any substance and interventions that need to happen for this to become true. It's one thing to say conceptually, export-led growth will develop these economies. It's another thing to recognize the real challenges in getting exports from Africa into the global marketplace. You have serious non-tariff barriers. It took me 14 trips with this accent and this tie. And I sit there and I speak, I don't fidget. I'm steady, I'm speaking to the buyer, I'm saying we have good coffee from Uganda. Idi Amin died a long time ago. Don't believe the last king of Scotland. But believe me, to wipe away, all that pollution, that things like the last king of Scotland and even worse, Connie 2012. Guys, it's one thing to be well-intentioned. It's another thing to be misguided. And when you're misguided and you portray a complex issue in such simple terms, and you create this impression that Connie has been in Uganda today. Connie's not been in Uganda for 4 or 5 years. He's not been in Uganda for 4 or 5 years. The debate and the dispute is not whether he's taken in child soldiers. That's not the debate, but the impression you give. So when guys come like us from behind with products to market, the buyers we find, that's all they have. They have Connie 12 on their mind, and they're thinking, am I really going to buy this product from this guy who comes from this country where Connie is rampaging in the north and has got 30,000 child soldiers? I mean, the issue could have some truth, but it's much more complex than that. Never mind that the video erodes the dignity of the people that the video purports to be wanting to help. These helpless Ugandans. I mean, there's a part, and part of me sympathizes with good intentions, but the other part says, look, there needs to be more wisdom with these things. You have this young man, and on this fatalistic rant about kill me. In my culture, or for someone to just say, oh, I think you better kill me 5 years after the fact when he lost his brother. If he said, look, 5 years ago, when my family was killed, I felt like I just wanted to die. You could have killed me then. But 5 years later, before a camera, and this guy is saying, kill me? I mean, what does that trigger in people? It triggers one thing here, and people raise money, and that's fine, and every celebrity jumps on. And by the way, I welcome any celebrity endorsement. If any of you guys are, I really do. I was telling Bill, we need to change the narrative, man. I think Good Africa needs to go some route like that. But if you undermine the dignity and you posit this thing where generous and kind Westerners come to the rescue of these Ugandans, I mean, you're really simplifying what is a very, very complex internal issue. And so it's sad. But lastly, I'm talking about this because this is an issue everyone I meet asks me when they get to know that I'm from Uganda. Look, Connie had become irrelevant. Right now, he's the most relevant thing out there. For 100 million people to see this guy, he has just been elevated to the level and given publicity that he never had. So, who knows what that will do? Who knows what motivation that will give? This guy was an extinguished tyrant, So, the issue of how we portray issues, the perception issues, is a very critical issue. The other issue is the issue of access to capital. Access to capital for entrepreneurs in Uganda and most of Africa is one of the biggest constraints to entrepreneurship. I think the World Bank Group wrote a financial access report in 2010 that said that out of 1,000 people who were looking for capital, looking to access credit, only 28 of them were able to access that credit. This is in sub-Saharan Africa. And you put that within a kind of aid-dependent environment where you have a lot of aid coming in, and because of the distorting capability of that aid coming in, You have the central bank in Uganda, for example, doing what is known by economists as sterilization. So they sterilize these foreign currencies that come into the country. And how do they sterilize them? By inviting people and institutions to buy monetary instruments like treasury bills and government bonds. That is to counter the inflationary impact of the shillings that they need to produce in exchange of these foreign currencies that come into the country. So what happens is a lot of commercial banks then buy up these government bonds, sucking out capital that would be available for the private sector. And in Uganda today, you find that 63% of these treasury bills and government bonds are owned by the commercial banks. They hold the largest portfolios of these government monetary instruments. So, I think that we have a pilot here that stands for encouragement, that stands for people renewing their faith in the private sector. The guys don't have to look like you, they don't have to be dressed like you, but they have ambitions and they have aspirations that are just similar to you. That's one thing I have found. An entrepreneur in China, in New York City, in Kampala, in the Rwenzori Mountains has the same thing. They want good education for their children, they want good education for themselves, they want good health care, they want better housing, they want better mode of transportation. They want all sorts of things that we all want. So what is the constraint that's stopping us? I think it's a mental infrastructure issue. It is an issue which allows us just to humble ourselves and say, if these guys want the same things that we want, if I'm a businessman, I want markets, I want customers. So if they want markets and they want customers, how can we facilitate that? How can we create markets? How can we create customers? How can we provide capital? If a lot of this $80 million that the Soros Foundation has put into the Millennium Villages had been put into a social entrepreneurial venture capital fund, I think we'd be talking about a whole host of different results than we've been debating this morning. And I'll just end with an example of what can happen. The US is the largest coffee market. I'm sorry, I got to end on a biased note. As a coffee producer, and this is the most important part of the speech, you know, keep this data in your mind. 400 million cups of coffee are consumed every day in the United States. 400 million cups. 150 million consumers. A $28 billion industry. If Africa, that produces 12% of the world's coffee production, gained 12% of the US market, it would equate to almost $4 billion, which is over half of US aid in financial year 2011. The key and the power is in your markets, not in your kind hearts and the handouts. That's great, you know, I'm big on charity. But I think the key to serious solutions are going to have to be based on business and are going to have to be based on trade and not aid. I thank you for listening to me.
All right, so thank you so much for a very inspiring talk. I agree with everything you said there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have time for questions, right? So those of you who want to come up, ask any questions, now is a perfect time. See one person coming up there. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking with us today. My question is, in your experience, how have you found accessing financing? Have you been able to easily find loans or debt, or I don't know if you've issued equity or not, and what is that experience like, and how do you think that market needs to change, or is it not an issue? Thank you.
Over here.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It was fantastic to get a little bit past the debate and hear about some solutions. So it left me wondering, those of us that sit around debating all day, what should we do now? And if the answer is go out and start businesses, how do we make sure that those businesses continue to do what Good African Coffee has done for people and for families and communities, and not fall into the traps that some other businesses fall into of creating more bads than goods? Thank you.
Okay, let's just go one after the other, please.
Hi, I was very glad to hear you say that you felt that there was a role for multinationals in working with local communities on development issues, because I think, and sorry to pick on you, Professor, but I think that, you know, if you create a problem, you fix it, and I think that a lot of you know, rich white people have created a lot of problems around the world, and now we're saying, well, you know, it's up to Africa to fix their problems, and so I'd be very interested to hear from you what you think the role in those partnerships is for foreign entities. Thank you.
Andrew, thanks very much for having us today and speaking with us. It was a pleasure. I just want to know what your thoughts on Dambisa Moyo's theory on eradicating aid to Africa is, foreign aid to Africa in particular. And she proposes that in her book, Dead Aid, that Westerners should completely forego giving aid to Africa within a period of 5 to 7 years. What are your thoughts? Would that force a lot of African governments to move beyond that cycle of corruption and dependence and start really building capital and giving access to entrepreneurs, all that kind of stuff? What are your thoughts?
Hi. One question. What is the government for you? Do you see it as a partner? Do you see it as a constraint? Do you have any relations with local governments, regional governments, national governments? Where is the government in this model?
Sorry, I'm not smart like the other guys. They took 200 questions and remained standing, so I'll just take 5. Access to financing, big problem, you know. I must have visited something like 20 banks. And as attractive as this model looks, no bank in Uganda wanted to fund us. First of all, they thought, you know, I'm out of my mind, or, you know, I'm really shielding something, something wrong with me. Why would I want to come up with a social entrepreneurial model that's looking to export Ugandan coffee to the UK? It's never been done before. So you're not going to pilot this stuff with our money, basically. And so we have failed to raise capital. I mean, it's people see some of the stuff on the internet and then they call me and go, are you really sure? You know, is this something? Why can't you raise capital? Raising capital is so difficult. Even with all these venture capital funds that are out there, and there's data that says, look, there's X number of thousand of venture capital funds in East Africa. The problem is really, they in their brochures, they say they're looking for social entrepreneurial businesses, but really what they're looking for is mature businesses, you know. The kind of risk capital that needs to be put into a business like this, there are very few people who are willing to do that. I mean, you know, I had to mortgage my house, sold a company that I used to run, that used to do marketing and promotions, borrowed from, you know, they say entrepreneurs borrow from friends, family, and fools. You know, I exhausted each and every one of those categories, and still didn't have enough, because I also realized some of the challenges I had was the social entrepreneurial vision needed a significant pool of non-profit seeking capital in the beginning. Because a lot of these things were infrastructural issues, you know. How do you get a return on investment on an extension worker that you have to put in the field for 6 months and put, you know, kind of microfinance trainers? You know, I had them on my expenditure statement, you know, I had them on my P&L, you know, I want to give 50% profit into the community, but weren't making a profit, so I had to expense it. So There's a real issue in raising capital. So I debated with Bill whether I'd put my bank account up there, and he said, no, probably not is a good idea. Do it next year's talk. So that's an issue with access to capital. In terms of what can you do, this is one of the greatest universities in the world. The faculty here is producing brilliant, innovative, creative, fantastic people who go out into the marketplace. You have so much intellectual capital that you could add. Yeah, some of you might go and make a big whack of cash and you could invest, but a lot of you will have a lot of knowledge and wisdom that would be play such an important role in supporting companies that you have either identified or you'd like to partner with. So don't underestimate the intellectual capital that can be put to use. I just spoke to a lady there who came and said, look, we're doing some modeling exercises in Ghana on financial literacy and sustainability of financial literacy and the rest of it. Those are the kind of things that I think can be brought into these partnerships. Role of foreign entities, again, there are partnership spaces there that can be utilized. The model I showed you here is sustainable, hopefully, in a sense that if we pulled out as good African, the farmers can still produce quality coffee, get quality prices, and keep the savings and credit corps going. So I think there are a lot of other sustainable opportunities there. Dambisa Moyo, I got to be careful because Dambisa is a friend. I think she has a good idea, and I think hers was a wake-up call. Sometimes you got to say things as brute facts, in kind of graphically to wake people up, and I think that's what she did. I don't think she'll say, in a mechanical way, yes, 5 years, and Africa will raise capital from the international market. Events, I think, have overtaken some of that, as we saw in 2008, 2009, and today. But I think the kind of shock treatment she suggested was important. It got people thinking. I'm sure there must be ways of getting this capital that's in these huge foundations and that on the one hand are on a track of trying to do some good, having less impact, and kind of bringing it into the mainstream where the entrepreneurs reside, operate, and try and bring about change. The role of government is important. Look, as good African, when we failed to raise capital, we had to go to the government and get a very expensive loan, a loan that's pegged on the treasury bill in Uganda, which is 23%. So we're paying the government interest of 26%, and we had to go back and say, look, we want to convert this capital for the farmers. So the victory we had there was we're taking this government loan and converting it into ordinary shares for our farmers. So the opportunities there that you wouldn't have with a bank. But yeah, capital remains a key issue. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming and speaking. I'm currently in the process of creating one of these partnerships that you are speaking of. A women's cooperative in Rwanda used that word actually and reached out to me and asked to create a partnership. And I'm seeking venture capital for them here in the United States. They're an established cooperative. It's not a new thing. They're very well established in their country. The problem that I'm coming across constantly, and I would love some advice on, is when I am speaking to investors here, as well as markets here, everybody gives me suggestions. They think that I'm here asking, or that the women are asking what they should be doing, and and instead of listening to the pitch, they say, oh, what you should be doing is trying to get them to produce local products. They don't understand that these women have been working very hard and very long and have very courageously and smartly created the product that they want to be pitching. How do you politely and respectfully talk to investors and ask them to leave their suggestions and hear the pitch that these women have put forth?
Oh, well, my interest is quote-unquote biodiversity. I've been looking at Brazil and found that in the last 7 or 8 years, there's been quite a reduction in the production of native fruits and vegetables in favor of more usually commercialized material. I'm sure that the same situation applies, especially with coffee, although it's a native African product, and you must have many varieties involved. There is the question of protecting native biodiversity, and I'm wondering whether you have plans in the future, perhaps not to make money by doing so, but perhaps to amplify the happiness of your members by encouraging their creativity and imagination with products that they're used to having.
Thank you.
Yes, Eddie Mandri from Kenya. Very happy to have you here with us today. My question has to do with the C word, corruption, and leadership. In Rwanda, for instance, we have Paul Kagame, and for some people think that, he's the epitome of the benevolent dictator who's doing good for the country, the nation, but sometimes people think, okay, what are the costs and in terms of how he's approaching the issue of leadership and governance. So in relation to creating an ideal, optimal business environment, what is the role of having good leaders, and what do you think is the role of China? We have huge projects coming up. There's a pipeline that's going to be going from southern Sudan through to the port of Kenya, Lamu. They've recently found oil in Uganda. So where does leadership come in, and how can we prevent these huge projects turning into a net negative for the people?
Thank you. Can I just take one more from there?
Thank you very much for your talk, and it was really interesting how you're raising the effect of exports, and if coffee exports did take their 12% share into the US, that would be such a dramatic inflow into Africa. I guess what I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit more about is the consumer's role within that. Because clearly, like, the US consumer and just the Western consumer has to be buying the coffee, and if you can talk about what their responsibility is to assist in development, at least from a consumption perspective.
Sure, thank you. Can I just take these questions? Yeah, got 10 minutes. Okay, they never listen. Yeah, rarely do they listen because the reality is that they have their own agendas. My debate is never with the people who have the capital and just don't want to give it or they don't want to listen. My debate is those who pretend that what you're doing is what they're really funding. And when you call them out, they don't deliver on those promises. We try and become better communicators. When I travel around the world trying to find markets, I'm not just battling the difficulty of the argument, I'm battling perceptions, I'm battling, all sorts of stuff, But you do find that, you keep pushing that envelope, you keep knocking on those doors, that you will find people who will listen. They're there, that's certainly true, they're there. They're not many, but they're there. And I think, debates like this, Bill, I think, and Yao, they allow the big funders of these projects to walk away a little bit more sensitive to how slightly devalued their currency is. And I think it's a very important thing. I don't think Stuart has left the way he came in. And that's very positive. And if the more private sector actors you get, the more they get to, because they're sitting up in these places where everybody's writing business plans and proposals to them, wanting money from them. Rarely do they actually hear the impact of the money that they're spending. So for me to hear 80 million, and you're talking about 150,000 farmers, mine is 14,000 households, and I don't think we spent more than $1 million. And there are other people doing it. It's not just us. So I think this is a very helpful opportunity. And through these kind of dialogues, I think you'll get people who will become more and more increasingly persuaded that maybe they need to look at different options. Just keep banging on those doors. That's what I'm doing. So we're partners in that. Biodiversity, yes. We've certified 2,200 farmers, organic certification. Essentially the issue is not so much about biodiversity. There is biodiversity taking place. There are really good environmental standards in many cases. They're just not certified. Because when it comes to certification, you get into this whole industry now of how expensive it is to get certification and all the rest of it. And that's really a debate that needs to be had, you know. You make access to markets difficult, you make certification to get access to those markets difficult. So, I mean, these are all a whole host of non-tariff barriers that sometimes make it difficult for people to focus on those areas. Corruption and good leadership, absolutely. There's just no way you can create the environment for entrepreneurship to prosper unless you have good leadership. And then, unless you have leadership that's committed to their country beyond their own stomachs and their own wallets. I think there's just no two ways about it. But the people who are going to bring about that good leadership is people like you, Edmund, you know, for you to go back home and to take your knowledge and technology and pressure these people to be more representative in that way. The role of China, you know, I think China has an important role. I think China has a positive role. I think China is at times more willing to listen to African ideas or African solutions, and they're willing to take greater risks. And I think there was a conference that took place in China a year ago where they also recognized that they need to adjust slightly the parameters of the partnership with Africa. And they need to really listen and see things that also impact the African economies more than the kind of natural resources approach. So I think there's a huge opportunity. They have the capital. They have about 1.5 million Chinese in Africa right now. So they're getting really, you know, accustomed to this interaction. So I think the opportunity is there. I think consumers have a big role, like I've mentioned. I think especially enlightened consumers, consumers whose purchase decision is also based on a reasoning, on an aspiration, on an understanding. When you guys buy your products, you also are careful to note the kind of philosophy behind these companies. Why do they produce what they produce? How do they produce it? And that's all important. So, you know, trade not aid becomes not just a mantra, but it becomes something that's significant, you know. And you say, okay, I want to buy coffees from Africa. I want to buy cloth from Ghana. I want to buy chocolate from Ghana. I want to buy textiles from Lesotho and Swaziland. I have 5 minutes left. Thank you.
My question is, how you talked about training trainers. Could you emphasize that a little bit more, or tell us how do you select the correct trainers?
Hi, I'm Jan from the Philippines. I'm a journalist back home, and I did a story in coffee because of my friend who works for Starbucks. And one of her initiatives is to make a Philippine brand. And I agree, infrastructure is a problem. And I was surprised, one of the problems also is teaching farmers to think globally. What she did was go up to the mountains and make them taste Starbucks and say, this is the kind of taste that we want. So my question is, how do you educate farmers to think globally? That's all, thanks.
As a business owner, what was your biggest obstacle to trade development? Domestic policies, credit access, international policies, market access? And additionally, do you see these obstacles being the same for other entrepreneurs in developing countries?
Good afternoon. Thank you for your very inspiring and instructive presentation. I would like to know, what do you think of African-owned and led institutions such as the New Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD? Through their programs, they advocate a bigger share, for example, of African national budget dedicated to agriculture. What needs to be done to enhance these activities and makes them relevant? Or it should be left to the private sector only? Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I've been in the coffee industry myself for many years, and I'm thrilled that you're here and to hear that Bill is such a huge fan of specialty coffee, as I am as well. I'm actually co-authoring a book on women in coffee, And our hypothesis is that women are the real engines of the coffee economy. And I would like to hear what you have to say, either to support that hypothesis or in maybe something counter.
Before you sit down, I support that hypothesis. No debate.
Good afternoon. You speak of the successes of entering the US and the UK markets, but what do you think needs to happen for increased participation within African countries as markets? Thanks.
Thank you. The trainers tend to be appointed by the community, the group itself. So we allow the group to identify people that they respect, peers within the group, and they appoint them and say, yeah, we listen to these guys. You know, when they sit us down and train us, we'll believe them. There's no point us identifying someone who we think, oh, they articulate or they take up the training well. So it's a community that does that. John asked the question on global outlook. I think perceptions change when we make incremental steps. I think social media has taught us that people can change opinion and can change perspectives and perceptives if they get together and share information. One person, I asked Bill how many people are following him on Twitter. He gave me a number that I'm not even willing to repeat here because it might bring a lot of us younger people to shame. But it showed you the power with which we have at our fingertips to communicate a viewpoint, an ideal. And for me, this whole trip, since I came in on Sunday, was how do I turn a Connie 2012 infrastructure for good African? You know, really, I mean, I think it's a legitimate question, and I'm willing to exchange emails with you guys because it's always the negative narrative that seems to feed into this, you know, huge interest, you know. And is it just because of how we are designed, we respond to those kind of impulses like that, or are there actually opportunities for good stories and positive stories, you know, reaching that broad audience? You know, it's a question, you know, I'm hypothesizing at the moment on that. Access to credit, number one issue, because I believe if I have the capital, I can find ways around some of these institutional challenges, you know. When we came into the US, we couldn't exactly go into all the supermarkets, but we could go online. So we could find a distributor, go online. Coming to the US is, you know, after 7 trips, you know, over 5 years, you know. And I've also written a book that will come out next year on this whole thing. And so capital allows you, and you know, that's some of the advantages in globalization of technologies, of access opportunities, and of platforms that you can communicate on. So I think if you have capital, I think you can circumvent some of these constraints. NEPAD has an opportunity. I think a lot of these institutions are well-meaning and have key competencies, but they just don't have the resources, I think, in many respects, and are constrained by those resources. But I think we can encourage those like the African Development Bank to do a lot more than they're doing right now. Women in coffee, I mean, that is a target for us now. We realize the challenge was the men, you know, I mean, you know, that's, we'll discuss that. Getting the men to let the women, yeah, because the women are by far, you know, in terms of productivity, in terms of output, in terms of what they do with the revenue that comes from the crop, in terms of land rights, you know, them being able to access land rights. And we've just been constrained with trying to address what's a broader issue, but absolutely, it's not a hypothesis, it's a truism. And in terms of the last question, I think also talked about partnerships. I think that's just the way to go, and collaborating and sharing and going on websites and Facebook and exchanging ideas. And there are tons and tons and tons of other entrepreneurs. They might not know Bill or Yao, they might not jump on a plane and come and talk to you guys, but Africa is teeming with these guys. They just don't get a platform to speak. And everyone just bunches them up in a kind of very stereotypical way as a bunch of guys who are just waiting for aid and waiting for handouts, But these are people who want to do business. That's what they do every day in a much smaller way than everybody here does. And they're ready for that. I think you just need to encourage your spheres of influence and in your community that Africa needs trade and not aid. Those who have aid, let them give it to business. Thank you.
So that was really fantastic there, Andrew, and really appreciate it. It's so good. I don't know if those of you who are more computer savvy and all that, who wants to help me do an Andrew 2012, okay? I mean, that's what I want to see there, okay? So thank you again, all right?